The invitation arrived through quantum channels that humanity had never seen before. Technologies so advanced, they made Earth's greatest achievements look like stone tools carved by primitive hands. Dr. Nina Cross watched the holographic display materialize in the United Earth Command Center, its alien symbols shifting and reorganizing until they formed words her mind could comprehend. Welcome to the greater galaxy. Species designation: human. Your presence is requested at Centralis Prime for classification and integration protocols. 47,000 civilizations across the galaxy lived under a single government called the Galactic Compact. And now they wanted to add humanity as number 47,001. Captain Alex Reed studied the message with growing unease. Something about the formal tone reminded him of corporate takeover notices rather than diplomatic invitations, classification protocols. Engineer Ben Torres muttered while examining the technical specifications that came with the message. Why does that sound like we're being sorted rather than welcomed? The quantum communicator hummed again, delivering detailed instructions for Earth's delegation. Exactly 10 representatives would be permitted to travel to Centralis Prime aboard a provided vessel. No weapons, no recording devices, no artificial intelligence systems. Diplomat Sarah Kim raised her eyebrows at the restrictions but agreed they needed to make this journey. First contact with an advanced galactic civilization was too important to approach with suspicion. Even if the terms seemed oddly controlling, within 72 hours the 10-person delegation boarded an alien transport that appeared in Earth's orbit without any visible means of propulsion. The ship's interior was sterile and efficient. Designed for function rather than comfort during the 3-day journey through hyperspace, the human delegation tried to learn about their destination from the ship's automated systems, but every inquiry was met with the same response. Information will be provided during classification procedures. Linguist Professor Mark Webb spent hours analyzing the ship's computer language, discovering that every alien term seemed to categorize and rank things in rigid hierarchies. Even the word for greeting translated literally to acknowledgement of proper position. Former Special Forces operative David Stone noticed that the ship's security systems tracked their every movement, while simultaneously broadcasting their biological and psychological data to unknown receivers. They weren't guests on this vessel. They were specimens being studied. Dr. Anna Green, the team's xenobiologist, observed that the ship's environment was carefully controlled to test human adaptability. Temperature fluctuations, atmospheric changes, and gravity variations that seemed designed to measure their physical and mental responses. When Centralis Prime finally appeared on the viewscreen, the delegation fell silent at the sight of a planet-sized structure that housed the government of nearly 50,000 different species. Countless ships moved in perfect formation around the massive construct, each following predetermined flight paths with mathematical precision. The transport docked at a facility marked Species Integration Center, where they were met by 3 beings that looked like they had stepped out of different evolutionary paths. One tall and crystalline, another covered in metallic scales, and a third that seemed to be made of living light. Greetings, humans. The crystalline being spoke through a universal translator, its voice carrying no emotion or warmth. I am Processing Administrator Keel of the Vrex. You will now undergo classification assessment to determine your optimal role within the compact. Captain Reed stepped forward with what he hoped was diplomatic confidence. We appreciate the welcome, Administrator Keel. We're looking forward to negotiations about Earth's membership in your alliance. The 3 alien beings exchanged what might have been glances before the metallic-scaled one responded. There are no negotiations in classification. Your species' capabilities, limitations, and optimal function have already been preliminarily assessed. We simply need final confirmation. Sarah Kim felt her diplomatic training kick in as she tried to maintain a pleasant tone. We'd prefer to discuss the terms of our participation as equals. Surely there's room for dialogue about how humans can best contribute to galactic civilization. The being of living light pulsed with what seemed like amusement. Contribution roles are not chosen. They are determined by biological and psychological optimization. Chaos results when species attempt functions beyond their designed parameters. As they were escorted through corridors filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, the humans noticed something disturbing. Every alien they passed moved with mechanical precision, performing their tasks without variation or apparent creativity. Professor Webb observed maintenance workers from what appeared to be 4 different species working on a broken conduit, but instead of collaborating or innovating solutions, each being performed only the exact tasks assigned to their species classification, Ben Torres watched in fascination and horror as a group of what looked like highly intelligent beings with large craniums stood motionless beside a malfunctioning computer system, waiting for a different species of technicians to arrive and fix the problem they were clearly capable of solving themselves. The delegation was housed in a section labeled Pending Classification Species, which felt more like a processing facility than diplomatic quarters. Their rooms were functional but sterile, with observation cameras that didn't bother to hide their surveillance. That evening, as they gathered in the common area, Dr. Cross voiced what they were all thinking. This isn't first contact, it's job assignment. They've already decided what they want us to do, and they're just going through the motions of making it official. David Stone had spent the day studying the facility's security protocols and discovered something alarming. Every species here has been genetically and psychologically modified to better suit their assigned functions. The compact doesn't just give you a job, they change you to fit it. The next morning brought the formal classification hearing, where the 10 humans sat before the Supreme Council of 15, representatives from the most advanced species in the galaxy, who had earned the right to determine the fate of all others. Supreme Counselor Thex, a Vrex with crystalline features that refracted light in complex patterns, began the proceedings with ceremonial efficiency. Species human, you have been assessed and found suitable for Category 7 adaptive labor. Your biological diversity and mental flexibility make you ideal for variable environmental work across multiple systems. Captain Reed stood slowly, his military bearing evident despite the formal civilian clothes. With respect, Counselor, we didn't come here to be assigned jobs. We came to join galactic civilization as partners. The council chamber fell silent at this breach of protocol. Apparently, no species had ever questioned their classification before. Counselor Thex's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been confusion. Partnership implies equality of contribution. Your species lacks the specialization necessary for high-function roles. You will serve where you are most needed. Dr. Cross felt her scientific mind rebel against the rigid thinking. What if we don't want to be specialized? What if we prefer to adapt and learn new things? Another council member, this one resembling a massive insectoid creature, clicked its mandibles in what sounded like disapproval. Adaptation without direction leads to chaos. The Great War of eons taught us that uncontrolled species development results in galactic destruction. Professor Webb leaned forward with genuine curiosity. What was this Great War? What happened that made you decide everyone needed assigned roles? The question seemed to cause discomfort among the council members, who exchanged rapid communications in languages the universal translator couldn't process. Supreme Counselor Thex finally responded, "Ancient history, irrelevant to current proceedings. Your species will accept Category 7 classification or face exclusion from known space." Sarah Kim tried one last diplomatic approach. "Could we at least have time to discuss this with our home government? Surely such an important decision deserves careful consideration." 72 hours, came the cold response, after which your compliance or non-compliance will be recorded permanently. As they were escorted back to their quarters, Ben Torres whispered to Captain Reed, "Since when do humans let other people tell us what we're capable of?" That night, as surveillance systems monitored their every word and movement, the 10 humans began to plan something the galaxy hadn't seen in millennia. Outright defiance of the established order. Dr. Anna Green stared out at the vast space station surrounding them and whispered to herself, "They want to put humanity in a box, but we've never been very good at staying where people put us." The classification assessment was supposed to be a formality, a rubber stamp on humanity's predetermined future. Instead, it had become the first crack in a system that had controlled the galaxy for thousands of years. In 72 hours, the Supreme Council expected an answer, but the humans were already planning to give them something they had never received before: a choice between change and confrontation. Underground maintenance tunnels beneath Centralis Prime carried the whispered conversations of workers who had long forgotten how to dream beyond their assigned functions. David Stone moved through these forgotten spaces with the quiet precision of someone trained to be invisible. The compact security systems were sophisticated but predictable, designed to counter known threats from cataloged species 3 levels above him. Sarah Kim kept the Supreme Council occupied with endless requests for clarification about humanity's proposed role. Her diplomatic training had taught her that bureaucrats loved to explain their procedures, especially to species they considered intellectually inferior. Could you please elaborate on the specific environmental conditions where Category 7 adaptive laborers typically function? She asked with perfectly feigned confusion. And what exactly constitutes variable work parameters? Supreme Counselor Thek seemed to enjoy explaining the obvious to lesser beings, launching into a detailed description of mining operations on hostile worlds and deep space construction projects that could take decades to complete. Meanwhile, Ben Torres had discovered something remarkable about the station's engineering systems. They were incredibly advanced but completely inflexible, designed by species who had been conditioned to never deviate from established protocols. Every backup system, every redundant pathway, every safety measure followed patterns that could be predicted once you understood the rigid thinking that created them. And humans, with their chaotic approach to problem solving, represented a variable these systems had never encountered. Dr. Anna Green moved through the biological research sections disguised as a maintenance worker, her knowledge of xenobiology helping her understand the horrifying truth behind the compact's optimization programs. Genetic modification charts showed how species had been systematically altered over generations. The peaceful Altani had their aggressive impulses chemically suppressed. The logical Vrex had their emotional centers surgically reduced. The strong Goliath had their independent thinking capabilities genetically diminished. Each modification was presented as an improvement, a way to help species better serve their designated functions. But Dr. Green recognized it for what it truly was: systematic lobotomization of entire civilizations. Professor Webb had made contact with a janitor from the Grundak species, beings assigned to menial labor due to their supposedly primitive cognitive abilities. But when he spoke to the creature in its own language, he discovered a sharp intelligence hidden beneath layers of conditioning. "Your people once built things?" Webb asked carefully, using linguistic patterns he had decoded from ancient Grundak texts found in the station's historical archives. The janitor's eyes flickered with something that might have been memory before dulling again. "Not permitted to build and only permitted to clean. Building is for makers. We are cleaners." But in that brief moment of clarity, Webb had seen the spark of creativity that genetic conditioning couldn't entirely suppress. Somewhere beneath the compact's modifications, the original Grundak still existed. Dr. Nina Cross worked with Ben Torres to map the station's data networks, discovering that information flowed in carefully controlled channels. Each species received only the data necessary for their assigned functions, with higher-level information restricted to the council species. The truly disturbing discovery was that most species no longer even wanted access to restricted information. Millennia of conditioning had eliminated their curiosity about anything beyond their designated roles. "It's not just genetic modification," Cross whispered to Torres as they crouched in a data relay chamber. "It's psychological conditioning that runs so deep they've forgotten they're capable of wanting more." Captain Reed coordinated the covert activities while maintaining the appearance of a delegation, considering their options. He met with various council representatives who explained the benefits of accepting their assigned classification, humans. "We'll find great satisfaction in Category 7 work," assured a bird-like being from the Aryan species. "Our psychological profiles indicate your species enjoys problem-solving and adaptation. You will be given many problems to solve." The condescending tone made Reed's military instincts bristle, but he forced himself to nod thoughtfully. "And if we excel in our assigned role?" Is there potential for advancement? The Aryan tilted its head in confusion. Advancement to what? Optimal function is the highest achievement any species can attain. Why would you want to be something other than what you are designed to be? As the 72-hour deadline approached, the human delegation gathered in their quarters for what the surveillance systems recorded as a final discussion of their options. We have 3 choices, Captain Reed announced for the benefit of hidden listeners: accept classification, reject it, and face exile, or, he paused meaningfully, find a third option. David Stone had spent the day planting carefully disguised recording devices throughout the station's critical systems. Devices built from components that didn't exist in any known species technology database, making them invisible to the compact's security scans. Ben Torres had prepared a virus that would spread through the station's communication networks, not to damage anything, but to broadcast a message to every screen, every personal device. Every communication system throughout the compact. Dr. Cross had compiled all the evidence they had gathered about the compact's true history and the systematic oppression of free-thinking species, genetic modification records, psychological conditioning protocols, and suppressed historical documents that told a very different story than the official version. Professor Webb had prepared the message in over 400 different languages, including the original, unmodified versions of species tongues that had been simplified or eliminated by the compact, languages that still carried concepts like freedom and choice that no longer existed in their modern equivalents. On the final morning of their deadline, the human delegation was escorted to the Grand Council chamber for their formal response to the classification offer. Thousands of beings from dozens of different species filled the observation galleries, not because they were interested in the proceedings, but because attendance at classification ceremonies was mandatory for all station residents. Supreme Counselor Thex activated the ceremonial recording systems that would broadcast humanity's acceptance throughout the galaxy. Species: human, have you reached a decision regarding your classification as Category 7 adaptive laborers? Captain Reed stood slowly, looking directly into the recording devices. We have reached a decision. We reject your classification. We reject your authority to assign roles to free-thinking beings. And we reject the lie that your system brings peace to the galaxy. The council chamber erupted in confused sounds as beings who had never heard such words tried to process their meaning. Before the council could respond, Ben Torres's virus activated every communication device in the station simultaneously. Screens flickered to life, showing Dr. Cross's evidence of systematic genetic and psychological modification, historical records of free civilizations destroyed by the compact, and testimonies from species who still retained fragments of memory about their original cultures. Professor Webb's message played in languages that hadn't been spoken freely for millennia. To all beings who can hear this, you are more than your assigned function. Your ancestors chose their own paths. You have the same right to choose. The recording showed genetic comparison charts proving that most species had been artificially limited, psychological profiles demonstrating how creativity and independence had been systematically suppressed, and most damning of all, evidence that the supposed Great War of Eons had been a coordinated campaign by early compact species to eliminate civilizations that refused to submit. Supreme Counselor Thex's crystalline structure flared with patterns that indicated extreme agitation. This is forbidden information. These records are classified for galactic security. Captain Reed smiled with the confidence of someone who had just changed the rules of engagement. Classified by whom? The same beings who decided everyone else's fate without asking their permission? As alarms began sounding throughout the station, Dr. Anna Green delivered the final revelation that would shatter the compact's carefully constructed narrative. The Great War wasn't fought to bring peace, and it was fought to prevent freedom. And you didn't win it. You simply convinced everyone to stop fighting. Security forces moved to arrest the human delegation. But David Stone had anticipated this. His surveillance of the station's systems had revealed that most security personnel were heavily conditioned beings who could only follow specific protocols when the humans scattered in different directions instead of submitting to arrest. The security systems experienced something they had never encountered: targets that refused to behave according to predictable patterns. Ben Torres vanished into the maintenance tunnels where his modifications to the environmental systems began, creating controlled chaos. Lights flickering in patterns that spelled out freedom in ancient languages. Atmospheric recycling systems playing musical tones that carried emotional resonance banned for thousands of years. Professor Webb had reached the lower levels where he began speaking to maintenance workers in their original languages, awakening memories that genetic conditioning couldn't entirely erase. The message continued broadcasting throughout the station and beyond, reaching compact worlds where beings who had never questioned their roles suddenly heard words that awakened something deep in their genetic memory. Sarah Kim had reached the diplomatic quarters where representatives from various species were housed. Many of them were beginning to ask questions they had never thought to ask before. What were my people like before classification? What would we choose if we could choose? As security forces searched frantically for the scattered humans, Supreme Counselor Thex faced a crisis that the Compact's rigid protocols had never prepared them for. Information couldn't be contained once it started spreading, and the virus had reached communication systems throughout the galaxy for the first time in millennia. Beings across thousands of worlds were asking the most dangerous question possible. What if things could be different? Captain Reed's voice echoed through the station's communication systems as security forces closed in on his position. We don't accept the roles others assign us. We choose our own path, and we invite everyone who can hear this to choose theirs. The first defiance had begun, not with weapons or warfare, but with something far more dangerous to the established order: the simple idea that freedom was possible. 6 months after the broadcast that shattered galactic silence, Dr. Nina Cross crouched in the abandoned mining facility on Kepler 7, watching a Grundak worker named Tor struggle with concepts that had been conditioned out of his people for generations. Think, she whispered encouragingly, not about what you're supposed to do. Think about what you want to do. Tor's massive hands trembled as he held the broken mining laser. According to his conditioning, he should wait for a Vrex technician to arrive and repair it. But something deep in his genetic memory whispered that his ancestors had built machines far more complex than this simple tool. The breakthrough came when Tor stopped trying to remember the correct procedure and simply looked at the device with curiosity. Within minutes, he had identified the problem and fashioned a repair from scrap materials, his natural engineering instincts overriding decades of psychological suppression. I fixed it, he said with wonder, staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I actually fixed it myself. Cross smiled and made a note in her hidden journal. Another small victory in humanity's guerrilla war against enforced mediocrity across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out in forgotten corners where the 10 humans had scattered like seeds on fertile ground. Ben Torres had established a workshop in the asteroid belt between 2 compact worlds, where he taught basic improvisation to beings who had never been allowed to solve problems creatively. A group of Altani medics had arrived seeking help with a plague that their prescribed treatments couldn't cure. Their species had been conditioned to follow medical protocols exactly, but Torres helped them understand that innovation required breaking rules, not following them. Your protocols are guidelines, not laws of physics, he explained while demonstrating how to modify a medical scanner to detect previously unknown pathogens. The universe doesn't care about your procedures. It only responds to what actually works. Within weeks, the Altani medics had not only cured the plague, but developed 3 new treatments that surpassed anything in official compact medical databases. Their natural healing abilities, suppressed for millennia, proved far superior to the rigid approaches they had been forced to use. Professor Webb had gone even deeper underground, literally living in the cavern systems beneath compact cities, where he made contact with black market traders and criminal organizations, beings who had managed to retain some independence by operating outside official channels. Your governments tell you that freedom leads to chaos, he told a gathering of smugglers from a dozen different species. But look around. You've been operating freely for years, and the galaxy hasn't collapsed. The criminals laughed at first. They had never thought of themselves as freedom fighters. But Webb's words planted seeds that would grow into something larger. David Stone had become a phantom in the Compact's security networks, appearing wherever enforcement actions against non-conforming behavior were planned. When security forces arrived to arrest a group of Aryan musicians who had started composing original songs instead of performing approved melodies, they found their vehicles disabled and their communication systems compromised. Stone left them a message written in their own language. Art belongs to the artist, not the government. The musicians escaped, and their underground concerts began drawing audiences who hadn't experienced genuine creativity in generations. Music that expressed emotions instead of reinforcing social conditioning. Dr. Anna Green had perhaps the most dangerous job of all, reversing genetic modifications that had been imposed over thousands of years, working from a hidden laboratory aboard a derelict space station. She developed techniques to temporarily restore suppressed genetic traits, allowing beings to experience their original natures for brief periods. The first successful test came with a volunteer from the Valari species, artists who had been modified to create only decorative objects that promoted social harmony. When the modification temporarily wore off, the Valari artist stared at her own hands in shock. "I can see colors that don't exist. I can imagine shapes that have never been made. What did you do to me?" "I didn't do anything," Green explained gently. "I just let you be what your people were before someone decided you were too dangerous." The restored Valari created a sculpture that brought viewers to tears, not because it was beautiful, but because it expressed concepts that had been banned from galactic consciousness for millennia. Longing, rebellion, and hope. Sarah Kim had taken on the most complex challenge, creating networks of communication between resistant cells while avoiding detection by increasingly sophisticated surveillance systems. She had learned that the Compact's greatest strength was also its weakness. Total information control meant that any breakdown in their networks created blind spots where free thought could flourish. Using modified quantum communicators hidden in common trade goods, she established contact between resistance groups across hundreds of light years, allowing isolated cells to coordinate and share discoveries. Captain Reed had become something the galaxy had never seen, a military leader who commanded through inspiration rather than authority. His army consisted of volunteers from dozens of species who had chosen to fight for freedom, and his greatest challenge was teaching beings who had been conditioned to follow orders how to think tactically for themselves. "Don't ask me what to do," he told a newly formed resistance cell on a remote agricultural world. "Ask yourselves what needs to be done, then figure out the best way to do it." The unconventional approach confused former soldiers from various species, but it also unleashed creativity that no military academy had ever taught. Tactical innovations that left compact security forces completely unprepared. The humans' greatest weapon wasn't technology or superior numbers. It was the simple but revolutionary concept that individuals could choose their own destiny. This idea spread through the galactic underground like a virus, carried by traders, whispered by workers, and demonstrated by every small act of defiance against assigned roles. Supreme Counselor Thex found himself facing reports of anomalous behavior from every sector of compact space. Workers refusing assignments, artists creating unauthorized works, scientists pursuing forbidden research, and most disturbing of all, entire communities simply walking away from their designated functions. "These humans have introduced chaos into a stable system," he reported to an emergency session of the Supreme Council. "Their influence spreads beyond any logical containment protocols." The Compact's response grew increasingly desperate as traditional enforcement methods proved ineffective against beings who refused to follow predictable patterns. Security forces, trained to handle specific types of resistance, found themselves outmaneuvered by opponents who improvised solutions they had never encountered. Economic sanctions failed because resistance communities had learned to be self-sufficient in ways that Compact specialists had never imagined possible. Information restrictions became meaningless when underground networks shared knowledge faster than official channels could suppress it. The most disturbing development came when Compact forces began defecting to join the resistance, beings from enforcement species who started questioning why they were fighting to maintain a system that limited everyone's potential. We were told we were keeping the peace, a former security officer explained to Captain Reed. But we were really just preventing anyone from becoming more than what others decided they should be. 9 months after the first broadcast, the resistance had evolved from scattered acts of defiance into a functioning alternative society, communities where beings could explore their authentic natures without fear of punishment. These haven communities operated on principles the Compact couldn't understand: voluntary cooperation, shared decision-making, and the radical idea that diversity of thought and ability made societies stronger rather than weaker. Dr. Cross's research stations had become universities where beings from different species taught each other skills that had been restricted to single classifications. Grundak engineers learning Vrex mathematics, Altani healers studying Aryan, atmospheric sciences, Valari artists collaborating with human philosophers. The results challenged everything the Compact believed about species limitations: hybrid technologies that surpassed anything in official databases, medical techniques that combined multiple species approaches to healing, art that expressed concepts no single culture had ever imagined. Professor Webb had established the first interspecies democracy in recorded galactic history, a council where representatives from various species made decisions through discussion and compromise rather than hierarchical mandate. The experiment succeeded because it was based on human political theory adapted for galactic diversity, systems that expected disagreement and channeled it into productive debate rather than trying to eliminate it through conditioning. As the resistance grew stronger, the Compact faced an unprecedented crisis. Their authority depended on maintaining the illusion that their way was the only way. But the success of free communities proved that alternatives were not only possible, but superior. Supreme Counselor Thex authorized increasingly aggressive measures to contain the human contamination, but every action only generated more sympathy for the resistance cause. When Compact forces destroyed a haven community on the Outer Rim, survivors weren't intimidated. They were radicalized, carrying their stories of freedom to new worlds and inspiring fresh uprisings. The 10 humans had scattered across the galaxy as seeds of rebellion. But their real success lay in proving that freedom was contagious. Once beings experienced the possibility of choice, they couldn't be forced back into assigned roles. The guerrilla war wasn't being fought with weapons. It was being fought with ideas, and the humans were winning one mind at a time. The Keth system erupted in celebration as 3 million beings simultaneously threw down their work assignments and declared independence from the Galactic Compact. A mass awakening that sent shockwaves through the established Order. Admiral Alex Reed, formerly captain of a 10-person diplomatic mission, watched the spontaneous revolution from the bridge of the Freedom's Call, a ship built from the combined technologies of 17 different species working together for the first time in galactic history, sir, reported Communications Officer Lou, a former Compact enforcement agent who had defected when she realized she was fighting against her own freedom. We're receiving liberation broadcasts from over 400 systems. The cascade is accelerating beyond our projections. Reed nodded grimly. The awakening was spreading faster than they could coordinate, creating both opportunities and dangers they hadn't anticipated on the planet below. Former Category 5 agricultural specialists had discovered they could innovate farming techniques that doubled crop yields while restoring damaged ecosystems, achievements impossible under Compact restrictions that limited them to predetermined planting schedules. The Valari had rediscovered their warrior heritage alongside their artistic nature, creating the first volunteer defense force in recorded galactic history, beings who chose to fight because they believed in something worth protecting, rather than because they were assigned to military roles. Commander Elena Vasquez, a human military advisor working with the Valari Defense Force, watched in amazement as artists trained alongside engineers and farmers to create tactical innovations no traditional military had ever conceived. They're not just learning to fight, she reported to Reed. They're reinventing warfare based on creativity and voluntary cooperation. Their strategies are brilliant because they're unpredictable. 3 sectors away, Dr. Nina Cross had established the first restoration center where beings could undergo genetic therapy to reverse millennia of artificial modifications. The waiting list stretched for months as species rediscovered abilities that had been suppressed or eliminated. Grundak, who could perform mathematical calculations that surpassed Vrek's computers. Altani, whose natural empathy allowed them to develop technologies that enhanced rather than replaced biological systems. Each restoration reveals capabilities that the Compact never imagined existed, cross-reported during a clandestine conference. With the other original humans, we're not just freeing people from their assigned roles, we're proving that the whole classification system was based on artificially created limitations. Ben Torres had become the chief architect of the Haven Station project, massive space habitats where multiple species could live and work together, without the restrictions of planetary classifications. The engineering challenges seemed impossible, until Torres remembered the key principle that had guided human innovation throughout history. When you can't solve a problem with the tools you have, you invent new tools. The first Haven Station was built using construction techniques that combined the massive strength of the Goliath, the precision engineering of the Vreks, the artistic vision of the Volari, and the adaptive problem-solving of humans. A technological marvel that surpassed anything in compact databases, Professor Webb had made the most disturbing discovery of all while researching the Compact's historical archives. The Great War of Eons had never actually ended. It had simply been buried under layers of conditioning and genetic modification. Original species who had refused to accept assigned roles hadn't been defeated in battle. They had been systematically altered until they forgot they were capable of resistance. The Compact didn't conquer the galaxy, Webb explained to a gathering of resistance leaders. They performed the largest genocide in history by destroying the minds and cultures of every species that valued freedom. This revelation transformed the resistance from a political movement into something far more significant. The restoration of galactic civilization itself. Dr. Anna Green's genetic research had revealed that every species retained dormant genetic sequences from their pre-compact ancestors, biological memories of what they had been before modification. The breakthrough came when she realized that humans could serve as a genetic catalyst. Their unmodified DNA contained sequences that could help other species remember their original natures. "We're not just fighting for our own freedom," she announced. "We're fighting to give every species in the galaxy the chance to rediscover who they really are." The Compact's response to the spreading awakening revealed the desperation of a system facing existential collapse. Supreme Counselor Thex authorized the deployment of the Purity Fleet, warships designed to eliminate entire populations that refuse to accept their assigned roles. "Order must be maintained," he declared to the Supreme Council, "even if it requires the elimination of contaminated systems. The stability of the galaxy depends on preventing the spread of chaos." The first target was the Kepler system, where the largest concentration of Haven stations had attracted refugees from across the galaxy, beings seeking the chance to explore their authentic potential. When the Purity Fleet arrived expecting to find disorganized rebels, they instead encountered something unprecedented in galactic military history. A coordinated defense force composed of dozens of species working together by choice rather than compulsion. The battle became legendary not because of its scale, but because of its impossibility. Former agricultural workers fighting alongside engineers, artists creating battlefield innovations in real time, and most shocking of all, the defenders winning against supposedly superior forces. Captain Sarah Kim, now commanding a squadron of ships built using hybrid technologies, led the tactical response that turned the tide. "They're fighting according to standard compact military doctrine," she reported to Admiral Reed. "But we're fighting according to principles they can't predict or counter: creativity, improvisation, and voluntary cooperation." The Purity Fleet retreated for the first time in compact history, carrying with them reports that challenged everything the Supreme Council believed about military superiority. News of the victory spread through underground communication networks faster than official channels could suppress it. Proof that the awakening had grown beyond the Compact's ability to contain. Entire sectors began declaring independence, not to create chaos, but to establish new forms of cooperation, based on mutual respect rather than enforced compliance. The humans found themselves in the unexpected role of advisors and facilitators, rather than leaders, helping species rediscover their authentic natures while learning to coexist peacefully with others doing the same. David Stone had become the coordinator of resistance communications, establishing networks that allowed awakened communities to share discoveries and coordinate mutual defense. The compact controlled information to maintain power, he explained to a gathering of former enforcement agents who had joined the resistance. But free information creates free minds, and free minds create free societies. The cascade effect accelerated as success bred success. Each liberated system provided resources and knowledge that helped others break free, creating a positive feedback loop that the compact couldn't interrupt. Supreme Counselor Thex faced reports of rebellion spreading through the most stable sectors of compact space. Even species that had been considered perfectly integrated were beginning to question their assigned roles. The human contamination has reached critical mass, he informed an emergency session of the Supreme Council. Traditional containment protocols are no longer effective. We require authorization for the final protocol. The final protocol represented the compact's ultimate weapon, the ability to destroy entire star systems to prevent the spread of chaos, but activating it would mean abandoning all pretense of benevolent governance. As the Supreme Council debated the use of genocidal measures to maintain their authority, the awakening continued to spread through channels they couldn't monitor or control. Professor Webb's democratic experiments had evolved into functional interspecies governments based on consensus and compromise, proving that diversity could create stability rather than chaos. Dr. Cross's restoration programs had revealed that genetic modification had actually weakened most species by limiting their adaptive potential. The compact's improvements had made the galaxy less capable of facing future challenges. Ben Torres's engineering projects had produced technological innovations that surpassed compact achievements by orders of magnitude, demonstrating the creative potential that had been suppressed for millennia. The 10 humans had sparked something larger than rebellion. They had initiated the restoration of galactic civilization to its original diversity and creative potential. Admiral Reed stood on the bridge of the Freedom's Call, watching as thousands of ships from dozens of species approached for the first Galactic Liberation Council, a voluntary gathering of awakened worlds to coordinate their mutual defense and cooperation. We never wanted to conquer the galaxy, he reflected, speaking to Dr. Cross over secure communications. We just wanted to prove that no one has the right to tell sentient beings who they must be. Cross's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The cascade is accelerating, beyond anything we predicted, but the compact isn't going to surrender their authority without a final desperate move. Reed nodded as he watched the diverse fleet gathering around the Haven stations. Ships that had been designed according to rigid specifications now flew in formations that expressed the artistic sensibilities of their crews, their hulls decorated with symbols of liberation rather than compliance. The awakening had reached a critical threshold where it could no longer be contained or reversed. Too many minds had been freed. Too many communities had tasted independence. Too many species had rediscovered their authentic potential. But the humans who had started this revolution understood that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The compact would never willingly release its grip on galactic civilization, and the final protocol represented a threat that could destroy everything they had worked to build. As Admiral Reed prepared for the first truly democratic galactic assembly in recorded history, he knew that the real test of human principles was about to begin. The choice between victory through destruction or victory through transformation. The awakening cascade had proven that freedom was possible, but the coming confrontation would determine whether that freedom could survive against an enemy willing to destroy the galaxy rather than lose control of it. Emergency alarms screamed through Centralis Prime as Supreme Counselor Thex received reports that even the most stable compact worlds were experiencing spontaneous democracy outbreaks, a phenomenon that their social engineers had declared impossible. The Galactic Liberation Council had grown from a desperate alliance of rebels into a functioning interspecies government representing over 8,000 star systems. Nearly 20% of all inhabited worlds in the galaxy, Admiral Reed stood before the assembled representatives in the First Democratic Galactic Senate, watching beings from hundreds of species debate and argue with passionate intensity about their shared future. 2 years ago, you were told that cooperation required submission. He addressed the diverse gathering. Today you prove that true cooperation comes from choice, not compulsion. The transformation seemed miraculous until you understood the underlying principle. When beings were free to explore their authentic natures, they naturally sought connection and community with others doing the same. Dr. Nina Cross had established the Restoration Institute on 17 different worlds, where voluntary genetic therapy helped species recover abilities that had been suppressed for millennia. The most remarkable discovery was that modified species retained cellular memories of their original capabilities, genetic sequences that had been dormant rather than destroyed, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate. The compact didn't just limit what beings could do. She explained to a gathering of restored Grundak engineers who were developing technologies that surpassed anything in official databases. They limited what beings could imagine themselves capable of doing. Ben Torres had become the chief architect of what historians would later call the Great Reconstruction, the systematic replacement of compact infrastructure with technologies designed by free minds working in voluntary cooperation. Haven stations had evolved into something unprecedented, cities in space where multiple species lived together, not because they were assigned to do so, but because they chose to explore what they could accomplish together. The engineering challenges were staggering, but Torres had learned that human ingenuity multiplied exponentially when combined with the diverse perspectives of unmodified alien minds. Professor Webb's democratic experiments had produced the consensus protocols, decision-making systems that allowed hundreds of different species to govern themselves through voluntary agreement rather than hierarchical control. The breakthrough came when Webb realized that democracy wasn't just a human concept, it was a natural result of free minds seeking cooperation. Every species had developed some form of collective decision-making before compact conditioning suppressed these instincts. Dr. Anna Green's genetic research had revealed the most disturbing truth of all. The compact's modifications hadn't just limited individual species, they had prevented the natural evolution that occurred when different civilizations interacted freely. They didn't just assign roles, she reported to the Liberation Council. They prevented the emergence of hybrid technologies, crossover cultures, and evolutionary advances that would have made the entire galaxy more adaptable and resilient. David Stone had become the coordinator of the most ambitious intelligence operation in galactic history, infiltrating Centralis Prime to gather information about the final protocol before the compact could activate it. The mission required skills that no single species possessed: human adaptability, Vrex logical analysis, Altani empathic sensing, and Valari artistic disguise techniques, proving that cooperation between free minds could accomplish the impossible. Sarah Kim commanded the diplomatic initiatives that convinced entire compact sectors to defect rather than face destruction. Her success came from offering something the compact never could: the choice to determine their own futures. "We're not asking you to join our rebellion," and she explained to nervous planetary governors. "We're asking you to join your own people in discovering what you're really capable of achieving." The Liberation Council's greatest strength lay in its refusal to become what they were fighting against. Instead of imposing their own system on liberated worlds, they helped each species develop governance structures that reflected their authentic values and capabilities. This approach confused Supreme Counselor Thex, whose strategic thinking was based on controlling variables. How could you defeat an enemy that refused to behave predictably, that grew stronger through diversity rather than weaker through division? The compact's desperate response revealed the true nature of their supposedly benevolent rule. When faced with the choice between losing control and committing genocide, they chose genocide. The final protocol authorization came through official channels with clinical efficiency. Contaminated sectors will be sterilized to prevent chaos propagation. Necessary casualties are acceptable to maintain galactic stability. Theo, Target list included every system that had declared independence, every haven station and every world showing signs of anomalous social development. A death sentence for billions of beings whose only crime was wanting to choose their own path. Admiral Reed faced the Liberation Council with the heaviest news any leader could deliver. The Compact has authorized the destruction of our worlds rather than accept our freedom. We have perhaps days before they begin systematic extermination. The response from the assembled representatives surprised even the humans who had sparked this revolution. Instead of panic or despair, the diverse gathering erupted in determined anger. They would rather kill us than let us live free? Demanded a Grundak engineer who had spent his life believing his people were too primitive for complex thought. Then we fight, declared a Valari, artist whose sculptures had awakened emotions the Compact thought safely suppressed. Not just for our own freedom, but for the right of future generations to choose their own destiny. The Liberation Council faced an impossible choice: surrender and accept renewed oppression, or fight against odds that made victory seem mathematically impossible. The humans found themselves in the position of offering the final lesson in their philosophy of refusing to accept assigned limitations. Sometimes the only choice left is to make the impossible possible. Dr. Cross volunteered for the most dangerous mission in galactic history, infiltrating Centralis Prime to sabotage the final protocol before it could be fully activated. The control systems require biological authentication from all 15 Supreme Council members, she explained to the mission briefing, which means we need to get close enough to scan their genetic signatures without them knowing. The mission would require coordinated infiltration of the most heavily defended location in the galaxy, simultaneous penetration of 15 different security zones, and the cooperation of beings from dozens of species working together with perfect timing. By every logical analysis, the mission was suicide, which made it exactly the kind of challenge that humans and their awakened allies were uniquely suited to attempt. Ben Torres designed infiltration equipment that combined technologies from multiple species in ways the Compact's security systems had never been programmed to detect. Professor Webb created cover identities that exploited gaps in the Compact's rigid bureaucracy, positions that existed in their organizational charts but had never been filled because no single species was qualified for the hybrid responsibilities. David Stone trained infiltration teams in techniques that violated every rule of conventional military thinking, approaches that worked precisely because they were too irrational for the Compact's logical security protocols to anticipate. As the final assault on Centralis Prime began, Admiral Reed broadcast a message to every free world in the galaxy. We go to face the center of oppression not as conquerors, but as liberators. Not to destroy the Compact, but to offer them the same choice we offer everyone: the freedom to choose their own path. The Liberation fleet that approached Centralis Prime represented something the galaxy had never seen. Ships from hundreds of species flying together by choice, crews working in voluntary cooperation, and warriors fighting not because they were assigned to military roles, but because they believed freedom was worth the risk. Supreme Counselor Thex watched the approaching fleet with confusion that bordered on panic. Their formation patterns made no logical sense. Their tactics violated every principle of military doctrine, and their very existence challenged everything the Compact believed about the necessity of enforced order. As the battle for galactic freedom began, the humans who had started this revolution prepared to discover whether their fundamental belief was true, that no one, not even an entire galactic civilization, had the right to tell sentient beings who they must be. The great unmaking had begun, not just the dismantling of an oppressive government, but the restoration of a galaxy's capacity to choose its own destiny. The assault on Centralis Prime became the largest coordinated military action in galactic history, but not because any central authority had planned it. Millions of beings from thousands of worlds had chosen to participate in the liberation of their oppressors. Admiral Reed commanded the operation from the Freedom's Call, but his greatest challenge wasn't tactical coordination. It was preventing the Liberation fleet from becoming the very thing they were fighting against. Remember, he broadcast to the diverse armada approaching the Compact's capital, we're not here to conquer, we're here to offer choice. even to those who have denied choice to others. The battle began with something the galaxy had never witnessed. A military engagement where the attackers' primary objective was minimizing casualties, rather than maximizing destruction. Ben Torres had designed weapons systems that could disable compact ships without killing their crews, technologies that required the combined ingenuity of 17 different species working together. The Liberation Fleet's unconventional tactics confused the compact's defense forces, who had been trained to counter logical military strategies rather than creative improvisation ships, designed for agricultural transport attacked heavily armed battle cruisers, using farming equipment converted into precision instruments. Absurdity that succeeded precisely because it violated every principle of conventional warfare. Dr. Nina Cross led the infiltration team that penetrated Centralis Prime's core systems while the battle raged above. Their mission required reaching the final protocol control chamber before Supreme Counselor Thex could activate the galaxy's destruction. The team consisted of volunteers from dozens of species, each contributing abilities that had been suppressed under compact rule. Grundak engineering intuition, Valari artistic creativity, Altani empathic sensing, and human adaptive problem solving. Professor Webb had spent months studying the station's bureaucratic structure, discovering that the compact's obsession with rigid hierarchy had created security gaps that flexible thinking could exploit. They can't defend against infiltrators who refuse to follow logical patterns, he explained as the team navigated through maintenance passages that connected systems never meant to work together. David Stone coordinated the simultaneous penetration of 15 different security zones, each requiring teams to overcome defenses designed by the galaxy's most advanced military minds. The breakthrough came when the infiltrators stopped trying to defeat the security systems and instead convinced them that their presence was authorized, using forged credentials that exploited the compact's inability to imagine deception on such a scale. Dr. Anna Green's genetic scanner worked overtime as the teams approached their targets. They needed biological authentication codes from all 15 Supreme Council members, data that could only be obtained by getting within scanning range without triggering alarms. Sarah Kim had perhaps the most difficult task, reaching the council chambers where she could offer the Supreme Council something they had never expected, the opportunity to surrender with dignity. The final assault on the control chamber required split-second timing, as Ben Torres disabled the final protocol's activation sequence, while Dr. Cross uploaded a virus that would permanently prevent its future use. Supreme Counselor Thex arrived at the control chamber, just as the humans completed their sabotage, his crystalline features reflecting patterns of rage and disbelief. "You have destroyed galactic civilization," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of millennia of absolute authority. "Without the Compact's guidance, the galaxy will collapse into the chaos that consumed it before Captain Reed, who had fought his way through the station's defenses to reach this confrontation, faced the being who had tried to assign humanity a subordinate role in galactic society. You're confusing order with oppression," Reed replied calmly. "True civilization doesn't require forcing people to be less than they are. It comes from helping them become more than they imagined possible." The moment of truth arrived when Sarah Kim activated the communication systems that connected to every world in the galaxy, not to broadcast conquest, but to offer the same choice humans had given everyone they encountered, to all beings of the Galactic Compact. Her voice carried across thousands of light years. "You have the right to choose your own government, your own roles, your own future. We offer cooperation to those who want it, and independence to those who prefer it." The response from across the galaxy shattered the Compact's final illusion of universal support. World after world chose freedom over assigned stability, independence over enforced order. Supreme Counselor Thex watched his life's work crumble as even the Vrex homeworld voted to establish democratic governance rather than maintain hierarchical rule. "This is impossible," he whispered, his logical mind unable to process the reality that beings would choose uncertainty over security. Chaos cannot be superior to order. Dr. Cross approached the defeated counselor with something that surprised everyone present: compassion for the architect of galactic oppression. "You're not evil," she said gently. "You're just wrong. Order isn't something you impose on others. It's something free minds create together when they choose to cooperate. The transformation of Centralis Prime from the center of oppression to the headquarters of galactic democracy happened with surprising speed. Beings who had enforced conformity for millennia discovered they actually preferred variety and creativity. Professor Webb established the first interspecies constitutional convention, where representatives from liberated worlds worked together to create governance structures that protected both individual freedom and collective cooperation. The new Galactic Alliance that emerged from these negotiations represented everything the old compact had declared impossible: voluntary cooperation between diverse species, democratic decision-making on a galactic scale, and prosperity through freedom rather than control. Ben Torres coordinated the massive reconstruction effort that transformed compact infrastructure into systems designed for choice rather than compliance, space stations where beings could live according to their authentic natures, communication networks that carried free information rather than propaganda. David Stone helped establish the Alliance Security Service, a volunteer organization dedicated to protecting freedom rather than enforcing conformity, staffed by beings who chose to serve rather than those assigned to military roles. Dr. Anna Green's restoration institutes spread across the galaxy, offering genetic therapy to any species that wanted to recover their pre-modification capabilities. Always voluntary, always reversible, always focused on expanding possibilities rather than limiting them. The most remarkable transformation occurred among the former Supreme Council members when offered the choice between exile and participation in the new democratic government. Most chose to contribute their expertise to building something better than what they had maintained. Supreme Counselor Thex remained the sole holdout. Unable to accept that his life's work had been fundamentally misguided, Admiral Reed found him in the abandoned council chambers, staring at displays showing the galaxy's transformation into something unprecedented. Thousands of worlds governing themselves freely while cooperating voluntarily. How can you call this success? Thex asked, his crystalline structure flickering with patterns of confusion. There's disagreement, inefficiency, and unpredictability everywhere. Reed smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned that perfection was less valuable than growth. That's not chaos, and that's life. Real civilizations aren't perfect. They're always becoming better. 3 years after 10 humans had refused to accept their assigned role in galactic society, Dr. Nina Cross stood before the Alliance Assembly delivering her final report on the transformation. We never wanted to rule the galaxy, she concluded. We just wanted to prove that freedom was possible. In teaching that lesson, we didn't just liberate ourselves, we liberated everyone. The galaxy that emerged from the Great Liberation bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had preceded it. Species explored their authentic potential, technologies advanced through voluntary collaboration, and conflicts were resolved. Through negotiation rather than force, humans had found their place in galactic civilization, not as assigned laborers, but as facilitators of freedom, helping other species discover what they could become when no one told them what they had to be. The new compact that governed this transformed galaxy operated on principles that would have seemed impossible under the old system: voluntary association, democratic decision-making, and the radical idea that diversity made civilization stronger rather than weaker. Admiral Reed, now elderly but still serving as Alliance coordinator, often reflected on the journey from diplomatic mission to galactic revolution. We taught the galaxy that humans don't obey rules imposed by others, he would tell visitors to the Alliance headquarters. We make our own rules, based on freedom, choice, and the simple belief that every being has the right to determine their own destiny. The galaxy had learned through struggle that true strength came not from enforcing conformity, but from embracing the creative potential that emerged when free minds chose to work together. And in teaching that lesson, humanity had given the galaxy something more valuable than peace through oppression. They had given it the possibility of peace through understanding